you, so I hope you'll consider subscribing to our newsletter and making a donation. We can't do this without you. I also want to thank the Ottawa Public Library, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, the City of Ottawa, the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, Carleton University, and CBC for their ongoing support. We've got lots of great events coming up. Tomorrow's podcasts feature Booker nominee Ruth Ozeki and two-time Governor General's Award winner Jordan Tannehill, so there's lots to look forward to. Our host tonight is David Cochrane, senior reporter with CBC's Parliamentary Bureau. David has won journalism awards for enterprise reporting, continuing coverage, spot news, and feature writing. So tonight we thought we'd see if he can transition from the political fiction he deals with daily on Parliament Hill into the wonderful world of nonfiction with our guest, Mark Critch. Please give a warm virtual welcome to our host this evening, CBC's David Cochrane.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm just going to assume there's thunderous applause because on Zoom you can't hear these things. I'm just going to take it for granted that you're all very thrilled to see me and not just here because of Mark, who has been a good friend of mine for many years now. I think, Mark, our friendship goes back a couple of decades when we first met each other back in the day when we were both living in St. John's. And I think it's gotten closer over time, it's safe to say. And here we are now. It's the first time I've seen you really since your wedding.
That's
we're here to talk
true,
about this.
yeah.
It's the pandemic.
right.
Because the last time I was home in Newfoundland was at your wedding, and then I think we saw you at the regatta shortly after that. And here we are. We're reuniting virtually to talk about your latest book.
Yeah, you know, it is kind of funny looking back at this book. Our careers kind of have similar paths. For those who aren't myself or David, we at CBC Radio in St. John's, David was a young political reporter with a lot of hair and a lot of ambition and brains, and he was always the smartest guy in the room even then. And I was coming in doing morning show commentaries, kind of making fun of the headlines that David had just unearthed mere moments before I mocked them. So this trajectory. Now David does real news, and sometimes I will use on the national network, and sometimes I will use clips of David mocking either what he said or the events that he's covering. So we're basically doing the same thing we were doing in like 1997 or 98, but in up along, as we would say back home.
So I want to start talking about this. An Embarrassment of Critch is available to fine bookstores everywhere, and not so fine bookstores everywhere, I would assume. I was reading this over last week, Mark, and it made me want to go for a drink. Because so many of the stories in this are stories that, you know, they're conversations you and I have had, whether we're at a pub or at a dinner table having a bottle of wine, you know, or having a cocktail. These are stories about everything you've done since you've become someone on television, you know, since your career really took off. And of course, you know, the household name because of your time on 22 Minutes. But you know, I want to go back to how it all started, you know, when you started in theater in Trinity, and sort of how your career, this opportunity, was born out of this great crisis for tens of thousands of people in Newfoundland and Labrador. The beginning of your career coincided with the end of theirs. Just talk about how it all started.
Yeah, so you're talking about, I mean, I had, you know, done sketch comedy in high school and a couple of little plays in town, but I had never really left my bubble of St. John's. And at this time in our province's history, as I was getting out of high school, the COD moratorium happened. And as you say, thousands of people were no longer able to do the thing that their families had done for generations, and the only thing they or anyone they knew expected to do with their lives. So everyone was kind of numb and in shock. And one of the programs they came forward with, the Atlantic Groundfish Strategy, was tags, as we called it, was sort of a top up on the EI so that you could retrain and get some money while you retrained. Nobody really wanted to retrain, but they were forced to do so. A lot of people became, you know, retrained as hairdressers or what have you. And then we, Donna Butt with Rising Tide Theatre, which was this great theater company that was been around doing really interesting work for decades in Newfoundland and Labrador. They came up with this idea in this little town of Trinity, population like 30 or 40 year round, to do a historical walking tour pageant using locals, many of whom displaced in the Cobb Moratorium to reenact historical moments around the town so tourists could come in and walk around and see them. So in some ways, it's almost like these people were being ghosts of themselves. You know, there was no longer a fishery to work in. There's a crab plant in the area that has been closed, and they were now pretending to dry fish on flakes and pretending to be in a boat and all this stuff for people. And I was one of the people from town brought out to fill out the cast and help with some of this training and stuff. And for me, it was, I'd grown up in Newfoundland and Labrador. I certainly knew of our culture through our music and through our comedy and whatnot. But it was the first time I think I was in the Bay, living in the Bay around people who worked in what you would think of the traditional Newfoundland and Labrador way. And that's really when I began to understand I didn't understand anything. And it's kind of, I'd lived in Newfoundland and Labrador, but that's where I fell in love with Newfoundland and Labrador, doing all this incredible, they went on to do plays and hang out with Newfoundland Labrador playwrights, and great painters would come in and do the sets. And so you're around all these amazing conversations with people who had these great careers, but also Newfoundlanders, Labradorians who were really not sure what was going to happen next. There was one place in a restaurant, not close to where we're doing the show, and the people who owned this little restaurant on the side of the road were so overwhelmed by what happened that they dressed two mannequins and they put them in the corner of the restaurant. One was in overalls with like an oil slicker kind of hat on, and then sitting down, and he had a bottle of rum, Newfoundland Screech, in front of him, and a couple of biscuits on the table. Table had a nice tablecloth on it and everything. The other mannequin was this lady dressed in an apron and a little handkerchief around her head. And then they had a big paper, like a cardboard word balloon cut out for each of them. And his said, "She's gone, maid, she's gone." And hers said, "The arse is out of her." And it was just like, somebody was so sad about everything and saw no future, to the point they were just one day just got up and dressed mannequins and stuck them there and said, "There." And they had made a statement about it. And a lot of people were feeling that way as stores began to shutter and people began to, sell their cars or move away. It was another great mass exodus of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. But that kind of what made me want to stay even more, I think. A lot of people would have gone to the mainland to try and be a comedian or try to go to the States. And I was like, no, that's where I really fell in love with Newfoundlanders telling Newfoundland stories. And I was like, well, that's what I want to do for a living. I want to write my own work and do it. And it's going to always have that kind of flavor to it.
Right. And before Trinity, I do remember your comedy troupe of St. John's Catfud. I think the first time I ever knew who you were, I saw you perform at the Breezeway, which is the bar at the university, which is before we knew each other.
Oh, yeah.
You were performed there like one Christmas, but Trinity's where the book kind of begins, right? Getting out there. And you're right. Like you talk about the world's saddest diorama, right? Like a depressed Sears manager put a couple of mannequins together. Things were terrible in Newfoundland at that time. The fishery had closed. It was the equivalent of the auto sector shutting down in Ontario. Oil hadn't started. And here you are, part of this birth of the Trinity Theatre Festival, with displaced fishery workers being retrained to be actors. And I wonder how that was, right? Because you've done movies, you're doing professional television now. This is the most amateur theater in a way. I just wonder how many of them, really took to it. Did they get into it, and did any of them stick with it after sort of like the transitional period ran out?
At first, like a lot of the guys especially were kind of like really eye-rolling about it. They're like kind of, well, I have to do this, right? There's no other way. I couldn't get into another program. I have to do this. And if you take somebody who is quite frustrated with what's happening, and now they got to dress up like, some in a powdered wig and pretend to be a merchant or something, they were getting pretty frustrated, some of them. And, we'd be there dressed in historical costumes, hiding behind some blacksmith's place or something. And they're like, "Boy, God, I'm going to get out of here. I'm sick of this. This is horrible." But then they go out and, showtime, and they would do these. And the thing was, they were so authentically good at it because they hadn't been They just were doing it, right? And then eventually they got down so well, they'd done so much that the lines were, there's no fear anymore after you do it a few times. And so many of them were incredible. And then we started doing more plays, right? It's like not just a pageant. Then you're like, well, we should do another play. We should do a comedy night. We should do a musical. And whatever you threw at these people, they would do it to the point. And tourists would come in and be like, well, how long have these people been acting? It's like, oh, like 2 years or something. And then they wanted to do a Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream. And I remember sitting in Rocky's Pub in Trinity with Rod Miller. And he was a friend of mine who was one of these guys. And he said, Mark, ye crowd are nuts, man. Ye crowd are crazy. If ye crowd think that we're going to be doing this, you're nuts. Ye crowd are crazy. And I said, hang on a second. So I whip open my script and I start circling all the ye's. And I say, look, we're already talking Shakespeare. Everybody else is talking wrong. We're still talking Shakespeare here because this is when this place was founded. And so then he's like, oh. And then they did this killer version of Midsummer Night's Dream. And then all of a sudden, different directors from Canada, from the rest of Canada, which we would call Canada,
the rest of Canada,
wanted to work there. Richard Rose, who was a great Canadian director. We had Bill Glasgow with Tarragon Theatre, who had first directed Displaced Saltwater Moon that I was doing out there, but he had done the original version in Toronto. All these different directors were like, hey, something cool's happening. I want to go down there. I want to work there. And so they started showing up. And then where there was a couple of hundred people, then one day there was like 1,000 people showed up. We had to do the pageant 3 times. And then it kept growing and growing. And these people were awesome at what they did. And then they started developing new works about sealing disasters and different things like that. And it just started becoming this beast. Nowadays, we used to perform in the streets, in the parish hall. We used to perform on wharves in resettled communities. We'd go out to this to the resettled community, and myself and Rod would cut down with a weed whacker where all the graves were that had been left behind, and they were like up this high, and you'd cut them down and do the graveyard, and then do like West Moon, which was this beautiful play about the spirits of people who were left behind in a resettled community. And it was very, very exciting and new and fresh and alive, and of the time and of the moment. And then eventually, years later, there was a theater built there, which they rebuilt a big fisherman's kind of rooms, a merchant's rooms, and it became a theater. And it's a big thing. But some of the people who were acting with me then are still acting there now. They've had whole
That's
careers.
what I was wondering, right? Like it took.
Yeah. It took. Oh my God. This whole region that became B&B's and Fisher's Loft, which is this beautiful high-end destination in the Port Rexon area. Mrs. Fisher worked with the theater company early on. Then they went on and they did this wonderful thing. And then different restaurants would open and all this different stuff. But what it was all these people started coming to this area more and more to see the theater. And then it kind of re-energized the place. And all these kids who were thinking, there's nothing I can do for me here, that I had to move away, they were able to stay and they could work there, or their parents were able to work there and then put them through school. I know some people, their kids or their daughters are teachers and stuff now, and that came, and they live there, and they're able to stay. So there was something about this time when everything is dying and everybody's moving away and there is no future, where it's like, all right, let's do it with art. And boom, we did. And today, as you know, Trinity is the place that everybody puts up in the tourism, as the New York Times does articles on it, and it's an incredible place. And many of those people are still working there. They've had other careers. They've done film work. They've done other stage work, and so it's never having to leave their house.
And as you said, tourists came to the area by the thousands, and not quite in Trinity, but probably the biggest name tourist was Queen Elizabeth, who came nearby to Bonavista.
Yeah.
And
Bonavista, yeah.
And you got to perform for her, and the premier of the day touched her in a way that he probably should have. Brian Tillman put his hand on her back. Just talk about that.
Yeah,
this amateur theater troupe being pulled to perform for the Queen.
Yeah, it's like the Queen's coming, and she's going to Bonavista, and they're recreating the landing of the Matthew, John Cabot's ship that came over. And it was, all these people had come out, thousands of people came out to see this. The ship was going to come in, and then the crew would get off, and Peter Mansbridge was there, and Gordon Pinsent, and all these people who sound like this were there. Very important. And then Betty Windsor, the Queen of England, showed up with Philly, and they came. And of course, it's as it often is on days like that in Newfoundland, Labrador. It was just blowing a gale, sideways rain, and we were there dressed in historical outfits to be to act as the crew, you know. And so I had to give a little speech about coming out and seeing everything I'd seen. And here I am performing for the Queen with the boys, you know. And it was just bizarre and wonderful. And of course, they didn't care. Like they're like, you know, come on, we gotta do this. How long is this gonna take? You know. But in that moment, I was kind of, wow, this is unexpected when I first came out here that we'd be doing this. And yes, Brian Tobin, the premier of the day, did get in troubles all over the tabloids for, some would say, helping Her Majesty up the stairs. Others would say shoving her up by the arse like the last cow on some kind of cattle car. And you're not allowed to do that, apparently. But welcome to Newfoundland. If somebody doesn't grab your arse, you're having a bad day.
Well, he put his hand on the
people
small
are very
back,
friendly.
right? Yeah,
that's
but he put his hand on the
arse,
small, yeah, up there, the upper arse.
It's arguable. That is arguable. Yeah. It's a better story with the arse. Don't go getting all newsy on me.
All right. Well, all right. So, because like I know you did stuff before Trinity, but in this book, Trinity's kind of the origin story. You know what I mean? It's kind of where it all started. It starts with Donna Butt and tags, and you leaving St. John's for your first kind of extended period of time in your life, right? It was like Newfoundlanders, there's townies, and there's baymen, and there's Labradorians. But you know, on the island, this is people from St. John's or townies. If you're from any of the outports, you're a bayman. My mother was a bayman, my dad was a townie, but your whole existence was largely just St. John's until Trinity came along, right?
Oh, 100%. And so, I mean, it's so fun. Yeah, no, it's just funny because we were, except for my father, was the only townie in our long line. I mean, my people had been fishermen from Gasker, St. Mary's Bay for generations. They all drowned. And then my dad's father died, went off to become a welder, like an iron worker on skyscrapers in New York. He came back, died of TB. And I have an old dad who's born in 1921. So when dad was 5, his father died. And then that was it. He was all of a sudden, now he's a townie because his mom had to come in, clean the floors at St. John's for a living. And then we immediately became completely useless, like in any kind of labor situation or catching fish or making food. And but it wasn't that long before that's who my family was. So I was like this, you know, second generation townie, and anything past the overpass, as we call it back in those days, was alien to me.
So you had done the general sort of theater in Trinity, and then you eventually decided to make comedy a full-time thing. What was it that made you decide, like, I know you've done some dramatic work and stuff throughout your career, but comedy's been the central focus. What was it that made you decide this is what I want to do? Like, I know you'd experimented with it in high school, but to make a career out of it.
Well, what happened was, like, I was, you know, trying to, you know, in Newfoundland and Labrador, like, I didn't want to have a net because I know everybody I saw who had a net, something to fall into, fell into it when times were very, very, very broke. But I found if I could do a bunch of things, if I could do my dramatic acting, if I could do kind of humorous plays, if I could do stand-up comedy and sketch, if I could write a little column for the newspaper and do the commentaries on CBC radio, all right, that's a living. It's a lot of plates, but it's a living. But then the comedy started getting more and more. That's what I was doing, and I guess it's always at heart what I've been, you know, and somebody who wants to write and perform his own work. And what I was writing was comedy, and then it became more and more topical comedy, and so the more I did stuff was that, and then that eventually that's kind of what came to pay the bills. And if I got a little bit of TV work, it would be comedy, like hosting a local show or something like that. So I became more and more known for that. But I think it was just a matter of survival at first, really. That's where the gigs were. And the next thing you know, that's who you are.
Well, speaking of that, because you talk about getting ready to, you know, when we first met each other, you were doing the column, you were doing commentaries on CBC radio. You know, I was doing a little bit of city council coverage and this sort of thing. But you also became a dad right around that time, right? Like you had a kid at 25. I became a dad at 40. You know, I was like 15 years into the CBC pension plan. And you were like as you say, trying to hobble it all together. I mean, you talk about it a bit in the book, but like, how does that change your whole mindset and motivation when you're a kid yourself? You're 24, 25 when you become a father.
Oh yeah, and also I'm like, I'm a comedian in St. John's in those days. There's no comedy clubs or anything even. So it's like, oh my God, this kid is screwed. I remember thinking, it's like, what am I going to do? Because I couldn't, I was like, what am I going to do? I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to be doing this for a living. This is what I want to do. But and then what that did though, when we had my wonderful son Jacob, you wake up, you go like, all right, it's on deck. I gotta produce now. At least that's what I did. Got to get out of the apartment, got to get into a house, got to do yada yada yada, got to get all these kid things you need, and I wanted to be. I remember holding them for the first time, going like, all right, I'm gonna do everything I can, not to let you down here, and then just work as much as you can, and come up with projects, right? And that's the Newfoundlanders and Labradorians what we do when we write stuff. Or like if you're a performer, you just start making your own work. You don't sit around and go to auditions. You're like, okay, I want to do a play. I'm gonna make a play. I'm gonna rent a hall and write it and hire some friends. So I think that gave me a lot of the professional drive I probably had, to try and make a bit of a name for myself and to do whatever it was. And man, I did some horrible gigs over those years. Anything like $50 over there. Okay, what do you want me to do? There's it's 120. Okay, I'm in. Where do I have to go? Labrador. Okay, I'm there. And that was it. It kind of set a fire underneath me and got me going. It was a wonderful experience too. Being a dad. I love being a dad.
Well, you say you go, work, and then that led to the big break in 22 minutes, right? I remember Mercer left the show, right? This was the big thing back. Rick Mercer's leaving 22 minutes because it was this big sensation, and he was famous for the rants, and he was gone. And immediately speculation turned to you as a possible replacement. And your dad was the deep throat for that speculation. He was fueling a lot of it.
Yeah, Dad was always like, Mom and Dad were Dad. They tried to talk me out of it at first, like being an actor, and then Dad had a friend who offered me a job researching deeds, and I was like, that's not show business, but he's like, okay, well, and that was it. They never brought up again. There was never like, you should get a real. They were always like, all right, so this is what's going on, and they were very, very supportive. They went to everything, and then when I had been asked to audition for this and send in a writing sample and all this. So Dad, all of a sudden in the paper or in the local magazine or in a radio show, come like, rumor is local guy Mark Critch is about to be to replace Rick Mercer. And I was like, the hell, where's this coming from? And I'm like, they're all going to think that I said this. And I'm going to be so like, I look like a jackass. Where's this coming from? So finally I called somebody at CBC radio, I believe. And I said, where the hell did you get that? I didn't say that. And like, your father called us. I said, what? And they said, yeah, your dad said. So I figured you could go, it's your father. But you don't have it? I was like, no. And I go to Dad and he goes, oh, all news is good news. If you print it, it becomes true. Don't worry about it. They'll be like, oh, well, this guy should. I'm like, no, they're going to think I'm a psychopath. But then eventually, Colin Mockery got the job. And, but I was hired as a writer. Like, okay, you don't get that job, but we're going to bring you out as a writer. And then they started sending me out on field pieces and being hit in the road and chasing politicians and all that stuff. And then shortly after, I was on the show full time.
So your dad leaked like a straw diaper, but it didn't hurt you in the end. You ended up getting the job. And how long? Like, I think you've written more and done more sketches for 22 minutes than anybody in the history of the show, which goes back decades now. I mean, am I right in that?
I would say in that I started writing in like 21 years ago or something. And then I would always have written at least 3 sketches for the show. So each week, and plus like, probably a road piece or something like that. So I guess I've been, and Mary was incredible. as cast members. Gavin Crawford wrote a lot when he was there, but outside of that, I mean, yeah, probably. Yeah, I think so anyway. I would imagine, just because I've been there the longest, I do 3 or 4 a week.
So, like Mercer, as we said, he was known for the rant. You're known for the field piece,
Yeah.
right? Confronting the politician, getting them to do things that they shouldn't do or wouldn't do normally. But you get that. So, who is the best politician to do a sketch with that you in your time on the show?
Well, Critch was always a lot of fun because he didn't care. Like, he's happy to do whatever, to be on. He likes attention. You put a light on, he'd be like, "Hey, what do you want me to do?" And it's like, "Okay," and "You want me to choke you?" It's like, "No, sir, I'm good. I'll choke you once." "No, it's good." Like, "Please, will you calm down?" So, like, he was always great. But the thing is, you might go with something in mind to do, but he's just going to start talking and waving his arms and doing stuff, and you just kind of learned with him was just kind of, you had to just, you come with a little bit of an opening sentence and then just hang on. It's like a bull and a rodeo. Had the Dan, Premier of Newfoundland, Labrador. He was always up for whatever, and I started playing him on the show as kind of like a complete madman, kind of just like a Bond villain almost, who had taken control of Newfoundland and Labrador, and we had done a piece where after he had yelled at Paul Martin about something and walked out of a meeting and kept walking out of things, I did a sketch with him where he kept walking out of the interview, and I'd written it, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." I'm like, "You want to see?" "Oh yeah, okay, great, I'll do that." I was like, "Okay," and then so whatever I came up with, he'd always go, "Okay, yeah, great, I'll do that." And then when he stepped down, so like it was like there was never any, "Well, could you not say this?" which you get a lot, or whatever. So that, because you had an actor basically do whatever. But I would say what I found, I think Justin Trudeau has been very interesting over the years because, like you and I, he kind of started around the same time. So the first time he interviewed Justin, he was at a Liberal rally, just as the Julian Lennon of Canadian politics. He was just there as Pierre's son, and some Liberals were standing around him trying to touch the hem of his garment. But he was just a guy. So I interviewed there. He just made fun of him. He kind of didn't like that too much. He played along. And then he runs, and then he becomes an MP, and then that's kind of funny. And then he runs for leader. He's not going to get that. That's kind of funny. And then he runs for Prime Minister. It's hilarious. And then, no, he's not. And then he gets that. And then all the other stuff. So I've watched him kind of ascend, and felt at times quite much on a peer, like equal footing and stuff. When he was much younger, when we were both roughly the same age. So Prime Minister I dealt with had been decades older, and someone whom I heard first in my mind, the first time I hear of them is they are that Prime Minister. So that it's in that, and you have a bit of a kind of a comfort with each other. It wasn't there before with anybody else, and over the years. So he was always it's always interesting to do something with, because it always can go one of two ways, which I kind of like. But he's been a great sport, for the most part.
Yeah, it's been a weird transition for me too. Like I'm a year younger than the Prime Minister. I'm the same age as Aaron O'Toole, and I'm older than Jagmeet Singh. And it's just it's a weird thing to get to that point in your career, right? But okay, so you mentioned Trudeau, and you've had good moments with him. There was a moment where he got mad at you though for pulling out a joint in his office, right? When he was still opposition leader. I think he was third party leader at the time. He was the party leader. Yeah. He wanted to legalize marijuana. So 2 questions. Was that a real joint that you pulled out in his office? And second question is, how bad did he take it?
Okay. Well, it was not a real joint. It was just, there was rolling papers, and I had like some like oregano or something. And everybody talking about legalizing weed and everything. And it was a thing. And he was like saying that, he had said he should, but then he kind of backtracked and all this stuff. And I was just down the scrum area grabbing people as you could back then, just standing around behind a pillar and go, there's so-and-so, let's grab him, and knocking off, like getting 6 or 7. And then I'd ask him, and he said, "Well, I don't want to do it here. I'll do it in the office because for whatever reason, just come up to my office.
Mhm.
I'll just do it there." I'm like, "Okay, that's fine. We can get him later. We can go up to his office." So we go in. We're talking about whatever, and then because that was the news story with him, I said, "I'm looking for a place to smoke this. I assume this is the place you would go to do this." And he's like, "Aha, you can't hotbox my office. What are you, crazy?" Big laugh. Everything is fine. And he turned off the camera. He's kind of like, anything, but there's a weird energy, around. And like,
Mhm.
I'd say my camera guy, Pete, we're coiling up the cables. And I'm like, something seems weird. He's like, nah, it's fine. I would go, and then it became quite testy for a while. And then someone from the office came over and said, "Hey, you can't use that because you can't be doing stuff like that in someone's office." And I'm like, I have to now because you told me I
Yeah.
can't, even if I didn't want to. Now, if somebody had said, "Oh, that I thought that wasn't fair," I'd probably go, "Oh, man, maybe it wasn't that fair if I didn't need it." But because you tell me I can't, then I'm going to because I don't work for you. Like it was one of those things to get your back up, right? So now I'm having this argument in the parking lot, and I'm like, "My God, that's going in." And then after that, that was like, yeah, I was like, there was no go for like I don't know, a year or two. And then when he was running for prime minister, happened to get off a plane, chasing. I was actually going. This is how bad Chris Alexander's career was. Going to do an interview with me in a Halloween store, and all these different outfits placed around that he was. And so anyway, so I'm doing this thing, and then Corey Gibson, I land, and Corey Gibson said, "Oh, at our hotel, Trudeau's bus is outside now. Drop everything." So I had a bag full of costumes, and so we went over there, zoomed over there. We start following the bus, and like, oh, where's it going to go? And it pulls into like a grocery store. He's going to do a thing. I still know what I'm going to do, and I'm holding this garbage bag full of Halloween costumes, and it's like we're like, what's going to happen? But I'm like going to get it there, and somebody come up to me and like, "You can't do this here," and I'm like, "I can." Like, "What are you going to do?" And I'm like, "I can get up on that stage after he finishes speaking, stage, and I'll make her, and all these news cameras are going to take. They're probably going to use this is that one there because I can't. And say the Mountie's like, "Can I do this?" And he's like, "Yeah, you can do that." And so like all this stuff is going on. And then Daryl Butts, "Would you rather do?" And so we went off and did that there. And I kind of put on the wig and everything and became Trudeau and start talking to kind of broke the ice. And then we're fine again after that.
And it's been fine
It
ever
was a great
since.
bit. No, absolutely. Yeah. And he's, I've gotten to go and stuff like that. So it's been like with traveling with the media, legitimate people doing the stuff, and then along and be able to make fun of them both in Vietnam and at the White House. So yeah, no, the relationship's been great. He's been great. He's been a great sport, and even just recently during the last election, I was able to do another piece with him. So yeah, so it's every election, whether they want it or not, they had to talk to the clown. So it's a
No,
weird thing about
well,
Canada.
and the fact that you have better access to the prime minister of this country than I do does not grate on me whatsoever, considering that I actually, am supposed to talk to him professionally. But it's interesting. The joint incident seems so innocent, right? It's so fun, it's
Mm-hmm.
silly, and it became this source of real contention. And you back it up a few years and a couple of prime ministers earlier, and you go back to when Paul Martin was prime minister, and you talk to Carolyn Parrish, who was no fan of President George W. Bush at the time. And you did the sketch with her with the George W. Bush doll, and she drops it and stomps on it. And it becomes a giant
Yeah,
thing where like her career got derailed. So it was a
yeah.
completely, this is another one that I think at the time seemed also seemed innocent too, right?
Oh yeah. Well, you know what? I don't even know if I would have used that clip. So what happened was we go to her office to talk to her about. It was all in the press. Martin was mad because she had said Americans are morons and George Bush is a this and a that, and they'd been asked about it, in the States and stuff like that by reporters, and so they were like very upset. And so I asked her if she'd come on and try and make up. to say something nice. I'd say, look, say something nice about George Bush. Should we do a little back and forth? So she did. So I brought on this doll that was on one of our writers' desks, just as a novelty piece, a George Bush doll. You pull the string and it would say a couple of phrases. And I thought, well, if I can make her say something nice to George Bush. And we're doing the piece, and then she drops it and stomps on it. And it's just B-roll. That was just B-roll for cutaways, right? I had her doing stuff with the doll. Then we are, I don't know, forget where we were, but we had to, the show was going to be taped that night or something. So they ingest the tape, the raw footage. It goes up to, the CBC, and it's going to get sent down to Halifax. And while it's being ingested into the system, some reporter sees it on one of the many screens, that are there. Go, is that Carolyn Parrish? Stop it on George Bush. Stop. Before my flight lands, say, what did you do? Like, before we didn't have a cell phone. I'm like, we have one. What am I talking about? And they turn on the TV. It's like one of those movie moments, reaches behind and turns on the TV. And Don Newman is there, earpiece and going, let's have a look at the tape again. She's definitely stepping on the doll. We have the panel. Panel, what do you think? Well, this is going to affect U.S. And I'm like, what the hell? And then, and this is actually a line. Somebody said, the only thing that could have been worse is if this idiot got her to start to stab the doll with a needle like it's a voodoo doll, Don. And somebody said, what's that? I'm being told we have that clip too. And I'd forgotten I had a pen. And I said, this was a voodoo doll. Where would you stab it to do the least damage? She said, probably in the head where it wouldn't hurt him. And I was like, oh dear. And everybody starts calling. The next day's front page Globe and Mail, front page Toronto Star. Like it's everywhere. And then they're asking questions in the White House in the press briefing. Will this affect things? It's become this big thing. And then Martin calls her in. She's out and all this stuff. And I was just like, it was weird because it's not what my intent was. And then she, and I tried to call her office, and it was just like busy for weeks, Eventually got a hold to her, and we had a good talk about it. She wasn't mad at me at all. She asked how it was, and and we still look forward to this day. And I gave her the doll, and she gave it to her grandchildren. So
it's a lovely parting gift. Lovely parting gift from the Liberal caucus, right? Because she got kicked out over this, right? She got kicked out of the Liberal Party.
No, but it shows you how quickly things can get away from you, and because you are dealing with things that are so, not only are things such hot button things and what have you, but also there are a lot of people who are looking for any reason to topple someone, right? So this was pre-internet. Right? Really, there was the internet, but it wasn't like the same way. There's no Twitter or anything back in those days, right? So it's like, oh, that was like, a big one, a big piece of framing. Now it's a million different things are taken this way and that. Now you get like, I'll get Erin O'Toole tweeting at me about the monologue I did that he didn't like. And then Maureen Harper starts tweeting at me like, yeah, you shouldn't be making fun of Erin O'Toole. What the hell's wrong with you? Get rid of the CBC. I'm like, what are people doing? What do you, calm down, everyone, So I wish I could have a Carolyn Parrish. It would be a lot easier than some of the stuff you have to deal with online with people yelling at you.
But do you think something like that could happen now? Because it seems like back in the day, in the early days of the show, people would go along with it. Like you said, Cretchen was game for anything. My sense is the way they deal with people like me is far more controlled than it was 20 years ago. And there's restrictions and limits and threats and lines put around everything you can do. Do you encounter that? Like, could Carolyn Parrish, could anything like that even remotely happen now?
Well, I think like oftentimes you get people away from their little handlers and stuff like that. Then you can kind of do anything. But not really. It's one of those things where like that was never intended to happen, right? So it wasn't like trying to trick her into doing it. So I think oftentimes now, at least back in those days, TV became a big thing. If anything, you might be more aware and more on your P's and Q's than normal, especially as a comedian. But nowadays, I mean, the phones and everything, and people are doing it to themselves left, right, and center, right? I mean, I can't get to a politician before they ruin their own career. You know what I mean? It's like you got like, oh, somebody got elected, I better get there before they implode. So it is different. People are much savvier these days, you know, I think about. But the other thing too is things don't have like a bit can go viral or something like that. But in those days, everyone was watching and very much aware, and TV was a different medium, you know. So you were the half hour where that kind of thing happened in the country then.
Right.
And now you know, things are all over the place, and people things are ingested in different ways. So it would have to be, you know, fairly big to have that kind of effect. Now the other thing too is I think the show had a made itself ambushy and all that stuff, and when I first started doing stuff, people didn't really know me or know what I did. They knew Mercer, they knew Mary, but like, who are you? So I could get away with a lot more and get into places and sneak into things, and people wouldn't necessarily might think I'm just a reporter or a staffer or something until I have like a mic, a lapel mic on, and then whip out the hand mic when I'm next to the person. Whereas in that parking lot, there'll be people like, oh, that guy's here, you go out the other door. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
a different game now, in a lot of ways. I mean, I used to have to sit in the car, hide behind a pillar, and chase politicians to try and get them because they didn't know who I was or didn't have the access. And then when they had Big Orange Wave came in, one of the new NDP MPs got in, and I went to like interview somebody like in a scrum area, and they said to me, "It's like, oh, Mr. Critch, I grew up watching you, and I used to sit with my parents and watch your show as a child," and I'm like, no, oh
Oh no.
no, I see what's happened here, you know, and it's like, oh dear, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. I can't goon you now. I'm like an old man. It's like, oh, look, the nice old man is gooning me. It's like, oh, so yeah.
Uh, uh, Question I got to ask, because the sneaking around, the hiding behind pillars, the ambushing. I remember the first time I interviewed a premier or even asked a question of a premier or a prime minister, how nervous I was. So, like,
Yeah.
it's indelicate, but like, where did you get the balls to do this? Like, you're jumping them and accosting them and making fun of them. And most people would never even dream of doing that in their life. So, where did it come from? Just the guts to do it.
Well, I think it's a necessity. Like you got a kid home and you got like this is the check. It's like go get this guy. That became my way to get on the show. You know, I remember sneaking around one Halloween, getting Kretchen in a. I went in the scrum area with a Kretchen mask on, and I go up and I get him, and then I went to Radio Hall banging on the door trying to get Adrian Clarkson to come out, and she did. And it's like it's just stuff that looks crazy now when you think about it, but like it was like, oh, I got to get this piece, you know. And but I would get very nervous because I think you would know I'm people wouldn't really get this, but I am, you know, somewhat shy and retiring in a
Yeah.
way. Like if I'm around new people, like I'm pretty quiet, you know. I'm never like the life of the party unless I know my if it's like, you know, good friends like elf around, like yeah, I'll joke around, but if there's new people, I could be quite quiet. So in those days, you'd go and you'd show up at the scrum area, and there'd be all these people like these real reporters who, when they come, they have to get a thing from this person for their story. And then I show up, they're like, "Oh man, you're gonna ruin this! What the hell? Go away!" And they get mad, and I'd be like, "I hate to be here too. I'm a clown." And it's like so it would get awkward, but I would always go after last question, or like, you know, you'd have all this really weird sign language going on with the staffers and stuff. I remember one time Peter McKay, he was in trouble for the jets or something, and I'd driven out to where he was going to be, and I had a jetpack I had made. I was going to give him like this cheaper for you to get around this way because of the helicopters and all this stuff.
The helicopter.
And he's like looking like, no, yeah, no. He's like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. And I was like, I am going to do it. Go out that door, I'm gonna get you there. Go out that door, I'm gonna get you down. Worse, if I have to run, you come to me. Not so bad. And he's like, no. And I'm like, gonna happen. He's like, fine. And he comes over, and I'm like, no, you could just gone out the door. But like, so I hate being this pushy guy and doing these things, but it was a necessity. And then after a while, you get to know some people, and then you get to know, like, you know, the staff there kind of know you. And then at a certain point, it came a thing like where it was almost expected that it had, like, if I would show up, they'd be like, oh, he's here. Like oh, they step back a little bit as opposed to going in. It's like, oh, and it would happen, and over time, and then you get to, and then when I realized, it's very intimidating at first, and of course, I didn't, as a younger person, I didn't know as much as I know now about who these people are and what they. So you'd be kind of terrified that you might reveal that you don't really know that much, or you don't have that much to say. But then over time, you start to realize that they're probably more afraid than you are. And then oftentimes I would spend my time kind of like settling them down a little bit, like, oh no, that's gonna be all right, just messing around, it's okay. And I think the one thing somebody once told me, so like, do you have this weird thing where you can insult somebody in their face and it doesn't feel like they're being insulted? They're like the kind of a thing you might say something the way you say it. And I think whereas Mary would come in and kind of get the person bigger with a sword and kind of like do a monologue with the person, they're almost like a prop. My thing was always, I think, to come, gentler, I guess, and talk to them and then try and find something, maybe like doing, wasn't necessarily scripted, it might be more in the moment. I would come up with a zinger, if you want to call it, or something like that. So it was a different style. Once I settled into my own, I was fine. Producers and people were always telling me, like, well, you got to be like Rick, or you got to be like Mary, or it's got to be like Rick, or it's got to be like Mary. And then after doing it a while, once it was like, oh, Mark's going to do his thing, then I was fine, because then it was like, okay, well, I know how to do that. I'm comfortable. I'm not Mary Walsh. I'm not Rick Mercer. I can be me. And once I carved out that little place for myself, like, I felt way more confident.
Yeah, doing an impression of someone else can be a bit, but it can't be a career, right? You have to have your own voice and be
Yeah.
your own person, and that's just the way it has to be. And I think the stuff in the book with the politicians, I think those are things that people remember because they've seen it on television. The stuff that stuck out to me, and I know Tom Power had the same reaction when you were talking to him on Q, was the where you're in Afghanistan, and just your flight there, your encounters there, the Taliban attack while you were there. I mean, you're there for a Christmas special, right? I mean, where does that rank, and how was that on the list of career trips?
It was fascinating. It all started with I was doing a casino show for a comedy festival, and this guy showed up, and he was on leave from Afghanistan. He basically said, like, look, we don't get some of the shows aren't great. I think it'd be great if you came over and did a show for us. I was like, how to make that happen. So I reached out to my friend Jeff Dion, who's a TV producer, and then we're going to go over and do a show. And then we figured, well, why don't we do like a little special over there while we're there, and we'll do a stand-up night. So we go over, and I'm sitting on this herc, strapped in, going over with all these people. And at first, it's like that kind of thing is an adventure, right? Like they give you the warning about this kind of thing. Intimidating. You're going for the right reason, but you do get a little caught up in the gung ho of it all, and you're on a real herc. You're going. And this guy strapped next to is pretty quiet and so loud on those things, And he just leans in and goes, I put a hole in my bedroom wall because of you. Like, what? I mustn't have heard that right. He was like, I punched a hole in the wall because of you. Like, oh. And he's like, he's leaning on his rifle. And I was like, geez, Louise, this doesn't happen in the Bob Hope specials, And he says, I said, what happened? He goes, you made a friendly fire joke on 22 Minutes. And I was in that incident, and I was sitting there with my wife, recovering, my hands all messed up. My friend died, and you made fun of it. And it was just, wow, okay. And now you're also strapped in next to the guy for the 2 hours. So it's like, okay, I'm learning a lesson pretty damn well in this moment. And we talked about all that, and he explained that, yes, it was friendly fire, but we depend on the American cover, and that happened for these other reasons. It was basically a dumb Americans joke or something that was made on the show. Turned out I wasn't the one who did it, but it was still on the show I was on. So and we talked a lot about his experience. He had been wounded. He decided to re-enlist because even though he could have gotten out, and he was going back, and he wanted to be there to support the other people that he served alongside. And he had his ticket out. And he said, "No, I'm not taking. I want to go back." So we there, and then he went off, and and then we ran into each other once more. He was going out, and I said, "Well, we're doing the show for you guys." He's like, "You're not doing the show for me." He said, "I'm going out past the wire, the forward operating bases. Real stuff happens." He said, "We're going to be doing shows for people working Tim Hortons, basically, base. There'll be some soldiers there." He said, "But a lot of the guys who need the show aren't going to be there. So you should know that." I was like, "Okay, wow, all right. Well, I'm getting a lot of truth here from this guy." And then there was a machine gun unit who had been out for 7 days. A bunch of the comedians were able to do a show for them, just 7 guys, because they had to go. That was doing a show for people who really needed it. And then I would be walking around at night. I went to the bathroom one night. This guy said, "Hey, come here. You're that guy, right? The Newfoundland guy." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." He said, "Can I talk to you about something?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Why are we here?" I said, "What?" He said, why do you think we're here? And do people home, is this like a Vietnam thing? Do people think that we should be here? Or like people mad? Because they don't really tell us. And I don't know what's going on. And nobody's going to tell me. I said, people back home, I'm emailing back and forth or calling. He said, they're not going to tell me. So tell me, be honest with me, man. What's going on? He said, because we go out there. He said, my friend's an interpreter, and we go out there and we meet some people in the villages. They don't know what Canada is. They think we're Russians. They don't know what's going on. All they know is like we're trying to win hearts and minds. They don't even know who we are or what's going on. They just want us to get the hell out of the village. So what do you think is happening? And then I learned like a lot of these guys just wanted someone to talk to that wasn't somebody they also were working with, right? To get things off their chest. And then we do the show, and they'd say at the start of it, like, "Oh, hey, if the alarm goes off, then that means a rocket has hit. Go out to the bunker," and all this stuff. Then the alarm goes off. And I thought it was a joke at first, but we all had to go out. And then I come back. They're like, "What do you do now?" They fire back, right? To the hills where the rocket came in. And they're like, I was like, "Well, is it over?" Like, "It's over." Like, "Well, let's go to the show." So we go to the show, and I'm doing my act. And about a minute left to go. And the alarm goes off again. And the place goes quiet. And I think, well, this is the worst heckle I'm ever going to get. This is a rocket. So I said, "We'll be right back after this brief missile." And everybody giggled, and we walked out. They fire back. And we go, "What do you do now?" I was like, "Well, let's go back in." So I finished like the minute of my act. And then we went into the hospital, and there's a guy from Newfoundland that we met there and stuff. And it really had a lasting effect on me, on what we ask people to do, what they do, and then what we do in return, probably. And I think in Canada sometimes we kind of don't want to talk about it, don't want to think about it, kind of say, "Oh, we respect the troops and everything," but then that's the end of it, especially when they come home, maybe don't get the support they need. And it was, and I realized, like, I was there to do a show, but I think the most the things I remember most is not the show or the a rocket attack. It's the bunch of different conversations I had where I was just listening. So listening for me was probably the best, one of the best memories of my career, was hearing them.
What struck me was what you wrote in the book when he said, "Why are we here?" I think you ended the section with, "I hope he found an answer he could believe in, or he could believe." And it struck me because the day I was sitting next to Rosie Barton at Rideau Hall when Trudeau was calling this election that we all just went through, Kabul was falling. That being so fresh and reading that over the last week, thinking like, what would he think now, having been there,
Well,
the sacrifices they made, and the Taliban's back in control,
Yeah. And so that's it, and I think even then the spider senses were tingling for a lot of those people, and they're realizing, well, hey, hang on, there's something wrong. Like, what's going on? And so when that was happening, I thought about those folks an awful lot. And there was a lot of other people I met in very similar situations. So yeah, that's kind of a trip that it really does stay with.
It's interesting, in the book, you talk about going to Afghanistan. You talk about going to Russia to plant a Canadian flag in Red Square in retaliation for the North Pole claim by Putin. You talk about going to Jordan to speak with, I guess, an Iraqi comedic dissident. And you talk about going to China and all of these places. But through it all,
Yeah.
It starts off with you wanting to see a larger world and then getting to see the larger world, but then always wanting to come back home. and I know you're in Halifax right now, but always you still live in downtown St. John's. You have a house in Trinity as well, where it all got going. I mean, so you went out and saw that larger world, but you always went back to the same two small towns that define you.
Yeah, and it's I never had intended to do anything else. Like a lot of people want to go down the States and whatever. I've always wanted to do what I was doing out in Trinity, and that's like create your own stuff and perform it yourself with other like-minded folk. And it's you and I think have an interest in politics because of Newfoundlanders' great love of arguing about politics, and because back home they're bigger figures, politicians, or kind of more like wrestlers in a way. And they have big personalities, and there's big issues and a lot on the plate, a lot of frustration, a lot of wit in our humor. So yeah, I mean everything I do, whether it's making fun of politicians, not like making fun of teachers at school, and joking with you about headlines is a lot like hearing dad and mom talk about politics back home. So it's everything that I do now is all stuff that was formed there, and I would never want to go anywhere else.
So, because we're getting short on time, so I want to ask you about this. So this is the book that's largely about your life on TV. And this is the book that's about your life that's going to be made into TV, because this Son of a Critch, you're turning that into a television series. I mean, talk about that. I mean, Malcolm McDowell is in your show. That's a big deal, man.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's and a producer of that and Last Man on Earth, these different shows in the States, great success. And he's like, we should make this into a TV show. I'm like, oh, you're crazy. Nobody wants that. So we wrote up a proposal, got together with the Project 10, one of the producers of Schitt's Creek, and Andrew Barnsley and Ben Murray, wonderful guys. And we presented this, pitched it just for laughs to a couple of networks, a little bit of interest from different people. CBC wanted it, so they bought it. And then we went down we put together our team and wrote these scripts, 13. And then knew finding a child who could. It's a lot of mix of. There's a lot of drama and heart in it. It's not just joke. It's a lot of quieter moments. And then so finding this kid, I was like, well, so I thought, well, let's try the UK, because they do a broader range of things, more child actors. And so we were able to find this guy Benjamin Evan Ainsworth, who's going to be Pinocchio in the new Pinocchio live action opposite Tom Hanks at Geppetto, and he's in Bly Manor. And the agent over there said, well, why don't we try Malcolm McDowell? I said, well, what's he doing? You're crazy. And she said, no, let's go for it. And they got the scripts to Malcolm. And then he said, I want to read the book. And he read the book and he loved it. And then we talked and back and forth, and he's like, I'm in. And then very quickly, this became much bigger than I had ever expected it to be. I mean, I was delighted we're going to be a TV show. And now I've got Pinocchio and the guy from Clockwork Orange in the thing. And then Lionsgate's interested in, they're on board. They're distributing internationally. And it's been the most rewarding and I think the best professional experience of my career by far. The people have been fantastic. Every level of it is great. I can't wait for people to see it. You're gonna love it. And these actors are so good. But it's every now and then I play my dad. So every now and then I'm dressed like my father, and they remade his outfits. I'm sitting in the house, my childhood home that hasn't been there since the 90s, and it's some of the furniture from my parents' home is in there. I'm dressed as my dad. I'll look down, and it's like I'm in my father's body. And I'll think, what the hell are you doing? Like, what are you doing? What's going on? And Malcolm McDowell, I'm like, oh, something has gone too far. I've done something. I've broken the matrix or something. It's all very strange, but it feels quite right. They say you can't go home again. Well, you can if people build it for you.
Yeah, we all used to dress up in our dad's clothes when we were a kid. You're just doing it in your mid-40s, and you're doing it professional, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you do for a living? I'm an impersonator of my father. I'm like a Frank Sinatra Jr. or something.
What was the harder book to write? So you've written two, right? So which was the harder one to write? Because the first one, Son of a Critch, is a Mark Critch the country wouldn't have known, whereas An Embarrassment of Critch
Yeah.
is the Mark Critch more people would have known. So when you're sitting down as an author, which one becomes the more difficult task?
Well, the new one by far,
Hmm.
because the first one is kind of like telling these stories, these memories. It's kind of like you get lost in it. Because the great thing about talking about your childhood or things happen, well, you start to realize things, and then you also memories start popping up. Like you're focused so much on that time, and then like, oh Jesus, that guy. Oh right, that thing. Oh my God. So it's wonderful. And ever as I would finish a chapter, I'd give it to my son Will to read. So that was a neat thing. I'd be like, what do you think? He'd be like, this happened to you? What? A nun hit you with a strap? Was she arrested? I'm like, arrested? No.
Promote it.
What did your parents say? It's like, I couldn't tell my parents. What, they hit me with something else. And he's like, what are you, crazy? So it's fantastic. And so it was a wonderful, loving experience. My parents had both recently passed. So my mom had just passed that year. So it was kind of a way of working through a lot of stuff. This one kind of felt to me like I felt a bit like a jackass, like I'm bragging or something. And when I said, I did this, did I did that, and then I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? And then the more you focus on then the very human stories around things that happen, like, okay, I went here and did this, but the story is everything else about that, not the. And so I found a way through it. And then, of course, back then it's like I could, I changed the names of a lot of people in the book. Like it's all kind of mixtures of different characters so that nobody gets upset. With this one, it's like, Justin
Right.
Trudeau's Justin Trudeau, or like you're you, or whoever, you know what I mean? So like I tell a story a bit about my friend Curtis Barrett, who was on duty the day of the terrorist attack in Ottawa, and everything he went through as part of some criticism I got for being in Mr. Harper's closet one time and all that. So I had to mention to him, I'm like, look, I'd like to mention this. I know you probably don't want to have all this brought up again, but how do you feel about that? So we had to have a conversation about that. So I don't like bother. So it's weird. Like I felt a much bigger weight in this one from that, and then there's much more pressure to get things, as right as you can, and it's kind So it was. I found this one by far the more difficult one to write. But at a certain point, I kind of hit a wall when I broke through, and I figured like, okay, I can do it like this. I got this now. So I kept putting it off for a while.
Well, it might have been tough to write, but it was easy to read. I got to say, I enjoyed it. And like I said, it reminded me of like having pints together or having a glass of wine
Yeah.
together and telling war stories about the stuff I did and the stuff you do. And well, your stuff is interesting enough to publish now in a second book. So, maybe
I'm pretty sure you'll Mansbridge it and put out a couple of books in your time, my friend.
I think, yeah. Well, I've got the hair. I'm not sure if I have the story. But listen, we're out of time, man. So we're gonna have to end it there. There's, we could talk for 2 hours about everything in the book and everything else.
Yeah.
But I just got to say, I loved it. I'm proud of you. I miss you. I got to get home to Newfoundland as soon as I can now that restrictions are lifted and COVID is getting better, and that silly election stopped me from getting there this summer. But congratulations,
man.
man.
Crazy. Well, thank you for doing this. I know how incredibly busy you are, so I really appreciate this. And we miss you so much, man. So hopefully we'll meet again. Don't know where, and all that stuff.
St. John's of Christmas, I think, is when it will be.
Yeah, I think it'll be a big party, buddy. Can't wait to see you.
Yeah. All right, man. Listen, thanks for everything, and thanks to the Ottawa International Writers Festival for asking me to do this and let me catch up with my good buddy Mark. And thanks for everyone who tuned in tonight to listen to this or is watching it online after we did it live. I've got a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old right outside banging on the door now. I've got to go for bedtime stories. I'll read them some Son of a Critch, Mark. See if that
it'll put them to sleep. I guarantee you.
Yeah, 4-year-old, probably for sure. All right, man. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night, everyone.